Welcome to Rick on Life, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. I'm your host, Rick Amitin. And this is where we talk about how to impact others by impacting ourselves. Today, we're going to talk about the power of story. And story is really our internal conversation. It's that self-talk. And even though we might not be conscious of it, it really is driving our lives. And as we experience life, we write a story about every experience that happens and ascribe a meaning to each one of those events. And it relates to our value and worthiness. And we make decisions and develop coping mechanisms to actually survive many times the stories that we've actually written about all of these life events. But there's a truth here. And the truth is that our long-term suffering is more in the story that we wrote about the events that have happened in our lives than it is about the actual event itself. And rewriting that story is about separating the facts of the incident or the event from the story that we wrote around it, and choosing a different storyline, one without the suffering, and it takes on new and different meanings, and then we are able to have different actions and make different decisions in our life. To help us understand the power of story, I have solicited the help of the lovely and talented Amanda Johnson. As a message strategist and mindful messenger coach, Amanda Johnson has helped inspiring speakers, authors, and coaches craft their message, expertise, and stories for maximum impact on their audience, their brand, and their bottom line. After years of engaging, clarifying, and helping others develop powerful messages as a student, teacher, and master writing coach, Amanda uncovered her own. The decision to share it launched her on a journey of personal and professional transformation that quickly made her limited life unrecognizable. In her best-selling book, Upside Down Mommy, Amanda shares the butterfly approach philosophy responsible for her success as a parent, wife, messenger, and coach. And besides all of that, Amanda's not only my book coach, but she's also a friend. And Amanda, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited about this show.
Well, thanks. I couldn't think of anybody really more appropriate to have to talk about my story and story in general and your story and the fact that all of our stories matter.
Yeah.
And so tell you what, just jump in here and tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, isn't it a funny thing when you think about telling your story, you immediately go to, oh my God, how much do I tell?
Sure.
The life of a messenger. I'll start in 2007. I was 27 years old, and according to everybody else, the story that everyone had kind of assumed about me was that I was on a trajectory towards success. Anything that I did, I achieved. At anything that I put my hand to, succeeded. That's what it looked like on the outside. So I was working as a writing instructor for this amazing company, online company, and the owner had asked me to look at her book because she just finished a book. So I had to edit this book, and I was so excited. And I remember sitting across the table from her over lunch where we were discussing it, and I asked her, how does it feel to know that you have written something that people are going to be a different person by the time they flip to the last page? Like, it was so powerful. And she said, it feels amazing. When are you going to write your book? And immediately I thought, who would I be to write a book? What would I write a book about? This person sees me as a really successful writing coach and mom and all of this, but she doesn't know the story that's going on underneath the surface. And so what she did by asking me the next question, which was, what value do you have to give today? She turned me upside down. I started crying. I gave her a quick hug and I tore into my car to try to make sense of what she had just asked me. And I drove home asking myself that question, what value do I have to give today? Because I could not reach any value in that moment. And I had this flash of a moment that I had experienced not too distant in the past, and it was of my son. We were living with my grandmother at the time, and she liked to co-parent. And I was a pretty fierce mom. I was a hot mess at this point, but I was really determined to not let my son turn into a hot mess if I could help it. So there were certain things that you just did not say to my son. And he broke a mirror and she got mad and she called him a bad boy. And so I started hauling butt down the hallway. I didn't know what I was going to do, but it wasn't going to be nice. And I got like almost all the way down the hallway. And I see him standing looking up at her with his arms on his hips. And he looks up at her and he says, "No, I'm not a bad boy. I just made a bad choice." And I thought, well, my work is done.
Yeah, we wish.
Story that I had been trying to unwind for myself, and what I had been speaking and messaging to him had gotten through. So I thought, on that car ride down to my house, I thought, what if I wrote a book? Because this was the 2007, it was the time of The Secret taking the world by storm, law of attraction. What if I wrote a book for parents about how to use the law of attraction with their children? And immediately I had this vision of 7 books. I came home, mascara all over my face, wrote down, I told my husband I needed an hour. I wrote down all of the outline, and I set an intention that I was going to attract one of the secret teachers. And of course, when I shared in my excitement, everybody, guess what I'm going to do? Most of them looked at me like I was insane, as they do. You're going to write a book? You're going to do what? And I just knew, there was one person who said, "Yeah, you are. I know that's going to happen for you." And 3 months later to the day, one of those secret teachers walked into a Sizzler behind me and invited me to a workshop. And that was the beginning of me, what I affectionately call slamming into my story, because I had this really amazing message that I wanted to share with the world, but it didn't make sense without understanding my own story. And so this is something that I find all authors do. We have this thing that comes through us, and it's like we have to share it with the world. And then we get into the writing and the preparation of it, and we think, well, how am I going to communicate why this matters? Crap, I have to tell my story.
Wow.
And that is when we figuratively and literally slam into our story and have to start to interact with it in a completely different way. And that's what happened for me in 2007. And it, I don't want to say that it arrested the movement, because it was just a different type of movement towards my book. It was, I decided that I wanted to heal my story, and that I needed to, actually, before I could stand on stage and help other parents, or, do all of the work that I had seen in that amazing vision.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we all have to realize is that this deep feeling that we often get to help others and want to think that what we are experiencing is an answer for other people, we oftentimes jump into that without realizing that that message was really to come through us, not to us, and that we have to wrestle that into its own value for ourselves. And so that deep desire to help others really comes from a deep, very intimate desire to help ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where story becomes so powerful. When I set out to write my book, I didn't know anything about writing. I had not gone down the path of writing. I had no formal training in writing. I had been a speaker for over 30 years. And I had been very comfortable on stage. In fact, I was probably more comfortable on stage than I was anywhere else, because it was the place I could get into the moment.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, it didn't matter about the past, and I wasn't concerned about the future. It was just the power of now and being in that moment. And I learned to function in that. And the problem for me was because my message was, my own personal message was distorted and dysfunctional in so many ways. When I came out of that moment of now, then I faced all the ugly stuff that I didn't want to deal with, didn't know how to deal with, wasn't equipped to deal with, didn't understand what was being communicated to me personally. And so I set out to write a book, and I did have a clear vision for its purpose. And one is I did want to heal my own life, and I've certainly wanted to understand that healing and be able to own it. And I wanted to clear a pathway for my grandson, who was going to experience the plight of the fatherless, because his father was not going to be involved in his life. And it had paralleled a dynamic in my life of fatherlessness. And I was just wanting to make sure that he had a better, like you mentioned with your son, I was just determined that it was going to be better for him than it was for me. And he would have a better life experience. Little did I know what that really was going to mean, and how that was going to unfold. And so I set out and began writing. I had a number of chapters written, and I had this idea of, what I was going to tell the world. I was going to save the world, fix the world. Everybody was going to just love what I was, doing. And I had no idea really what was in stake and what was at play. I didn't know you, and we met through a mutual friend. And if there was ever a clear case of when the student is ready, the teacher appears, this was it. And you brought me, invited me to a 3-day writer's workshop. And I went to that workshop clueless about really what to expect. And but I was very open, and I was searching, and I was in that place when I was trying to understand me, my life, the ups, the downs, the goods, the bad, the high points, the low points. I was trying to make sense of all of it, but I really thought, that I needed to tell other people, how to not do this or how to do that, and then as I got to your retreat, you had us do an exercise. And
it's everyone's favorite exercise.
Pardon me?
That's everyone's favorite exercise.
Yeah. And when you brought that up and said we were going to paint with watercolors, there was a moment there when I thought, what the heck is she
Am I in the wrong retreat?
doing? What is this about? I can't draw a stick man very well, and you're going to ask me to paint some kind of a picture. And so we just casually went into the room that you had set up with tables and sheets of paper and little bowls of water and paint brushes and little paint kits. And if I remember right, it was just something you said about, I want you to just paint a picture of your life. Now, this was a light moment. We hadn't been talking about anything deep. It was just, let's go in here. It was the first exercise of the day. And so we sat down, and I remember that I could not move my arm to pick up the paintbrush. I was immediately overcome with the most emotion I think I may have ever felt in my life. And I was paralyzed. And really, there was the deepest fear that I'd ever felt. I was really horrified. I didn't want to look at my life. And the thought of painting the way I thought about my life on that sheet of paper was just about more than I could take. And I remember just sitting there as the tears began to stream from my eyes. And I felt so awkward because nobody else was having that experience at that moment. And I was so afraid they were going to focus on me. And I didn't want anything to interrupt this moment, although I was scared to death of it. And I remember just getting up from the table and going outside to just try to figure out what was happening, to me in that moment. And all I could see was the ugly points of my life. All I could see was all that had been done wrong to me, all that I had done wrong to myself, and all that I had done wrong to everybody else. And I remember in that moment, it took me some time to process this experience before I could fully grasp all that was happening. But in that moment, I recognized that coming from a religious background, I was overwhelmingly sin conscious and not God conscious, and that I had been living my entire life under a paradigm of what is wrong, not being able to comprehend what is right. And sometimes I get very hands up, when people start, God said this, God said that, and I have reasons, substantial, bona fide, authentic reasons to be, somewhat questioning about some of these things that people say that God told them. But I'll just put it out there. The listener can be the judge of it. But I felt God talking to me in this moment, in this process. And what I heard was almost unrecognizable to me, because he said, this isn't you, Rick. All of these things that have happened, that you've done, the mistakes, the pain that you caused, the pain that you brought, the pain that others have brought into your life, none of this is you. And I remember wrestling, with what I was feeling and hearing about that. And what came out of that for me was an understanding, which is a great thing. Without understanding, we're all stuck where we are unless we understand something in a larger context. And so I came back into the house with these thoughts running through my head, and they were like words that were just on a continuous play at that point. And they were, I see you, I feel you, I understand you, and I know you. And I remember feeling more wanted in that moment than I had ever felt in my entire life. It was something it was so unfamiliar. As I began to understand the powerful love that God has for us, and how it was so different than how I had always thought of him and experienced him. So I sat back down at the table. I remember you saying, do you need a moment? And I don't need I've already had a moment. I have no idea what I painted. I know that you gave me the papers. You gave us all the papers. That I have no idea what I painted on it. It really didn't matter at that point. The picture was forming in my mind. It was forming in my heart. And so what we did from that moment is, obviously, what you do and the work that you do and the assistance that you provide to the people that you work with. I left that writer's retreat with a matrix and an outline for the book that really completely changed everything. I mean, you had the ability to see my story even differently than I did, and you helped me get rid of all the message killers and the the overriding and weighting of stuff that was taking away from actually the message. And, we worked through that process. And then there was a period, because I was doing a memoir, that I had to let it sit for a while and just work through this with myself and with my wife. And, until we could get to that place when I felt like the message was really emerging. And the story kept changing because I kept healing parts of my life. Mm-hmm. So the message that I was so committed to giving to everybody else had to be allowed to communicate with me. And the message really was for me. And so by impacting my own life, that's where the qualification came then to offer it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And so some months down the road, I came back to you and said, Amanda, I'm ready to finish this book and I need your help. And so we started in a different process. I would like to talk to you about what I've said so far about people who have these messages in their lives, these stories in their lives, and how they change and the work that you do.
Well, it's amazing to me because, as you're sharing your story, I'm flashing on images of so many of the clients that I've worked with, and many of them in the beginning of my practice as a message coach. I really truly thought, one day I heard this phrase, true to intention, and I was like, what is that? And I worked with some coaches and tried to figure out, what is this about? And I finally fell into this idea that maybe I could just use all of my natural gifts, skills, and talents. I mean, I've been helping people write stuff my whole life since junior high. It's just this skill that I had. So I was editing for everybody. And in 2006, I'd started kind of an editing business where I was helping people take 300-page books full of lots of story or absolutely no story, tear them down, rebuild them, hand them back, and watch the author go, thank you. But emotionally for them, because they'd poured all these blood, sweat, and tears, it was painful for them. So in 2009, with this idea of true to intention, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm supposed to help people from the beginning, help them get really clear on their intention before they start and create a map so that they don't go off-roading and spend too much time lost in rabbit trails. Well, I really thought that's all I was about to do until my very first retreat. And my very first retreat, our mutual friend that connected us was there. And she walked into the retreat, red-faced, upset, triggered out of her mind. Her week had totally set her up to face her story without her knowing what was happening. And she was pretty much silent for 2 of the 3 days, which wrecked me. It was my first retreat. What am I doing wrong? How can I reach this person? I mean, I was a mess trying to figure out how to help her. And the last day, as you know, part of the process is sharing the story that you've been working on throughout the weekend. And so she got up and the whole room was like, is she going to speak? She started to sing. And as you know, her voice is magic, right? And so she brought us all in with her voice, and then she started to tell her story at the end. And she ended up in a pile of tears on the floor. And I thought, oh, this isn't about the book at all. This is about true to intention. People have gone off the storyline that they came here to live. And it's a process of healing the story so they can get back on the storyline that they want to live. And that was, over and over and over again, we would have people come in and they're interacting with the concept in this chapter. And they just can't, there was one who, she had this beautiful layout of what had unfolded for her. And chapter 1 and 2, quick, right? So easy to write. Chapter 3, stuck for months working through. What are we, at that time we were having like group coaching sessions and just working through all the stuff that was coming up in life because it's this perfect mirror for where we're at. And it was because chapter 3 was about mourning, grieving, and the girl hadn't cried in years. And so it was like getting to that point where she could actually live through chapter 3 so she could move into chapter 4. And then chapter 4 was about, this whole process of how God had to teach her a lesson. And I remember that moment so clearly. It's like I shared in my book because it was one of those moments that life defining for me and for her. And I remember her saying, he had to teach me a lesson, he had to break me. And I thought, well, you're a mom, right? And she said, yeah. And I said, would that thought ever occur to you? To break your child to teach them a lesson? And she said, no. And I was like, then why do we imagine that that's how we are being treated on a bigger scale? Why do we focus on, this is what this, like you said, to your point about all I could see when I looked back was all the crap that had been done to me, all the crap that I had done to everyone else, all the pain. But what if all that was just a result of all of the choices that all the characters made that turned into this conflict? And what if when we look back, we stop seeing those moments and look at the ones that happen right after, when the heroes step into our story to help us figure something out? Or in your case, the hero that you're living with looks you in the eyes and says, I'm going to work with you through, we're going to heal this. It's like, what about those moments of grace? That's not what we look at when we look back and think about sharing a story on the page. We don't focus the moments on grace. We focus the moments on the pain. And so what I find is through this process of really having to get clear, what are those life-defining moments that we have to share in order to be able to communicate why this message is so important? We do have to share the moments of pain because that's where our reader is at. That's the only thing that they can connect to. They haven't had their moments of grace just yet in a lot of cases. So we connect with them through those moments of pain. But man, oh man, if we miss out on those moments of grace, we've missed out, I think, on the whole reason for writing our story in the first place.
Yeah, Brene Brown deals with this, and she does a much better job than I could ever, attempt to do. But courage is vulnerability, and we're so geared towards survival,
Mm-hmm.
and we're so fear driven that we're so afraid that if people really knew who we were, that they couldn't love us, that they would reject us, and you have to find that courage. You have to become very vulnerable. But one of the most humbling thoughts that we can ever comprehend is that God knows everything there is to know about us, and it doesn't keep him away. And the religious idea that God is somehow separate and we're trying to work our way to him misses the whole point of being one with him to begin with, is the whole purpose of everything that he's ever done. And I don't want to minimize life lessons and the things that we learn and the things that we experience and go through, but if you were really forced to just come down to the simplicity of what God is doing with all of us, there's really only two lessons. And it's what life is when you're in love. And I don't mean romantically, I mean you are in love.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are out of love. Those really are the only two lessons. Everything else is textbooks. It's just, information that will help you and guide you and map you along. But it's the love that we come from, that we are, and that we need to live in, express, and give away. And when we're not doing that, that's where we complicate our lives. And most of our messages that we're trying to, our parts of our lives that we're trying to heal and understand, it's the things that have happened outside of love.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this work that we do, personal growth, personal development, human development, pop psychology,
business development.
yeah, all of it really has to do with us connecting to our source, which is love. And I think things get further complicated because we start dealing with people who don't understand that themselves, and they're selling us as, a 12-step program or 13-step program to magnificence. And it's coming from a sales place. It's not coming from a whole place. So the point about, I'm not really a writer, and I'm a speaker, and I mean I work on my writing skills. I work hard at it. I'm trying to to develop. Not because I have an ambition to be a great writer. I don't. I'm not driven to write, although I write every week. I'm a contributing a columnist to Read My Mind magazine. I've had a number of articles posted on other sites. I blog every week. But I'm really not driven to write. I'm driven to communicate. And that's who I've been from the time I was born. It took on different meanings and wrappings over the years, but really I'm driven to write. And so my book is not it's a message. It's the message of a life that had its warts and had its gleam in its eye, and yet I came out, I think, in a very good place. And so we're not as damaged as we think we are. It's just our thoughts about that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's pretty amazing. Like I said, when you're able to look back. When I look back at my story, I see right now, even in the past year, I see an amazing rescue mission. It's like Mission Impossible, and I'm the one who needs to be rescued. And my message and my work in the world and love itself is, in this process of orchestrating this messenger into my life at this moment, and this, conflict into my life at this moment, so that I can see this. And it's like, I used to see things going wrong, and now when things go wrong, I'm more of the mind, because I've written through my story, I'm more of the mind to believe that things are falling together. It looks like they're falling apart, but somehow, things are falling together, and for me, things are happening for me, not to me. And I think that's really the biggest blessing. I was thinking while you were speaking, that whole piece of like what you said about the book, that your book is the message of your life. And I was thinking, oh, that's such a cool way to put it. Like, what if our lives are the message? Like, and so we think, oh, all we need to do is write the book or get to the stage, or, I mean, how many times have I worked with someone who came to me to become an author, speaker, or coach, and, they're stuck and they're stuck and they're stuck, and we're trying to figure it out. And they're saying things like, well, every time I get into this writing process, this thing happens with my husband. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So instead of saying, let's focus on the book, I follow my facilitator ear goes to, what's that about? What's the, and so then my question is always, so have you applied your message to this part of your life? And the answer is inevitably, oh, that's what I need to do. because we already have the answer. We've already figured it out in this other arena, which is why we want to share it with other people. But then we have the opportunity to live the message. And I find that a lot of times the reason why people don't want to complete the book or get on the stage is because they know unconsciously or consciously that there is something that is not aligned with their message. It's not aligned. And there's a part of them that feels really, really fraudulent. Like, I cannot put this into the world and still be in this relationship, or I cannot put this into the world and still be living in this environment that is like the opposite of what I'm preaching, you know?
Yeah, it's a great point. I know because of our relationship, of course, and we've talked a lot about this, but my story, because it involved fathers, had a personal dynamic for you. Even though you were coaching me, it opened up this road for you to go down. Share some of that with us.
Well, over the years, I always find it funny. I have this editor who, she's always the one who looks at the stories after we've worked on them, because at some point I can't see holes in them anymore. And we always joke throughout this process of editing that we're going to write a book someday about how these messages and messengers come to save us after they've saved the client and before they've saved the audience. Like, we are receiving such a gift in between. I mean, the financial person comes in right before I have this huge financial thing take place, and all of a sudden I know what to do, instead of the spiritual coach comes in with this whole new idea about God right before this crisis over here happens. Like, you cannot make this up. And so I don't remember how many months it had been. I think we started in 2015. And so I want to say it was like a year and a half later that you called me up and said, okay, I'm ready again. And I thought, okay. And I had just done the hardest thing I'd ever done with my dad. And that was, I had found myself in a position and in a role that wasn't really mine. It was like his role that he didn't want to do, so he gave it to me. And consciously or unconsciously, this is what had happened. And by 2015, I had woken up to the fact that I was living his life in a lot of ways instead of living mine. So here I've been for 6 years helping other people heal their stories and take new actions. And I'm doing all of the work alongside of them, all the work. I did not cower from any of that work. It was hard work. But it took me 6 years to see what was really happening in that part of my life. And so in 2015, I realized it, and I decided to start working my way out of that situation. I did a lot of personal healing work around this whole issue that I was facing with my dad, and so that I could leave and, not repeat any patterns. Like, I really wanted to heal it and not run from it and find it again somewhere else. And so I had literally just left that a month before when you contacted me, and was starting my new life. And so I remember one day I was giving you feedback, and you said something like, you keep saying that this is a great book and that this is awesome and you love it, but I don't feel that from you when I read the words over text or whatever. And it took me a minute to figure out what was happening, because I genuinely freaking loved your book. And so I was like, what is he talking about? And then I realized, oh, this is because every time we interact about your book about fatherlessness, to be a good coach, I'm holding the closet door of all the crap that your book brought up for me closed, so that I can be somewhat clear when I'm talking to you and not be driven by all this emotion over here. And so it brought up a lot for me. And we, I worked through it. I had my team of support that I leverage when I'm in that space, while I'm interacting with a message and while I'm working with a client. And so, here I was working on your book, working on myself, working on my relationship with my dad on the internal, because there was very little ability to work on it on the external. And my dad passed suddenly 4 months later. And I contacted my editor. She was one of the first people I contacted, and I'm like, because she had just lost her mom. So here, both of us were working through this whole message about dealing with a parent who has essentially not done what the parent is supposed to do in some way, whether it's not be there physically or not be there emotionally or be abusive, and so whatever it was. So she was losing her parent who had been that parent for her in November or December. And then I lost my dad in January. And I thought, oh, fancy that. Look at how that was divinely orchestrated for me to be able to work through all of those emotions and get to a place of healing so that when he passed, I did not have the nightmare journey that I could have had. I had already done so much of that work. So it's been quite the journey with you, for sure.
Yeah, it's it's definitely, you have to become comfortable with the process, because it's not like you can just take this step and everything gets better, or you take that step and everything gets better. I mean, writers want to work on writing, but writing wants to work on the writer. And the message is really all about what it is to us, not really what it is to anybody else. And there's a sound, to somebody that has found solutions. And we all have issues, and we all have things that go on in our lives, and we don't always know exactly what to do about it. But when we are making excuses and we're just into the blame game, and it's all about, these terrible things that have been done to us, and you're really not hearing the clear message that's being sent to you. And when we complain, for instance, complaining is just an admission that we believe that something better exists. But if we stay stuck in complaining, that just proves that we're not ready to make it better. We're not ready to do the bigger thing, the larger thing. And, I was still very angry when I was writing my book. But I thought it was justifiable anger. I thought it was, righteous indignation. And man, I really wanted to settle some scores, and it came out, in the writing. And really, I discovered through this whole process that anger is just an invitation, again, to make something better. My friend Kevin Nebel said it's an invitation. Anger is an invitation to compassion. And I recognized that I was really more angry at myself than I was anybody else. And it was a great distraction to focus my anger and displeasure on other people, than it was to confront, myself and be authentic and honest, and and deal with the stuff that you really hope nobody ever finds out about. And the truth is, that's our gold. That's where we dig it up, and that's the power that is within all of us. because we all make mistakes, and we don't all make the same mistakes. Thank God. I don't wish my failures on anybody. They're very painful, for me, as everybody experiences their own way. But it was these things that brought me to such a broader understanding of my Heavenly Father, who, because we get our glimpses of God from our dads. You can see it in moms too. It's just a different role. But our fathers are the ones who give us the initial concept of authority and power and instruction. And for me, my dad was missing. I met him when I was 5 years old, and it was the first time. And he came into my life, had a great couple of hours that, the best a 5-year-old would ever have. He made a lot of promises about what the future was going to be like. And he walks out the door that night, and I never see or hear from him again. Well, I ended up with 3 stepfathers by the time I was 9 years old. So over a 4-year period there was a tremendous amount of shake-up and upheaval and turmoil. But I figured out later on in life that every male figure in my life was run through these broken promises of my dad. Mm. And while my dad was real, I had met him, experienced him. He was out there. There's no question about that. But he, at some level, he wasn't there for me. And even though I had been in ministry, I had helped other people, I had developed skills, I had developed talents, I had developed understanding, I had gifts to rely on, there was always this feeling that things were not really going to work out for me at a higher level. Because God was there, he was real, I experienced him, but he was not real for me at those deeper levels. Mm-hmm. What I couldn't get past was the feeling of being unworthy, the feeling of being damaged, the feeling of being a fraud. And the power of positive thinking has a great potential to impact our lives. But it's very difficult to really go down the road of positive thinking if you can't change the feeling that you have, because it is the feeling that attracts the thoughts. And so that became the thing that I tripped over eventually in life, and ended up breaking my own heart, and which became more devastating to me at that point than anything anybody had ever done to me. Mm-hmm. And so then it was the opportunity for me to rise from that point and be who I was always meant to be, or be destroyed by continuing to hide. And, we can get so good at hiding that we hide our hiding. And so coming out, which is such a popular phrase, but when you realize the masks that you designed to try to protect yourself don't work. And I found myself in my writing and in trying to understand my own message and complete my book. When I came to you, I was very, very much alone in the dark with the light on. And you helped me shape some things and see some things, and through your marvelous talent and gifting for being a messenger and a coach. And so now that your father is gone and you've worked through some of the issues, how does it correlate for you in any type of religious way?
That is such a good question. You're helping me make a connection that I hadn't even seen yet. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to help you out.
That's why we communicate, right? Um, yeah, so last year, part of the big dramatic change for me was that um, I had been kind of living in an illusion, we'll say, um, that certain people were required to be my source of supply, financially, emotionally, mentally, like in all these ways, right? And so my one of my big steps last year was to free myself from that mentality and really choose to believe, like you're saying, thinking, believing. What I know by looking at my story now is that this is a rescue mission.
Sure.
God has never let me down. I have always taken leaps, and I have always been supported. And so these people are not my supply. So there will be some other way. And it was amazing what happened. It was like an instant. Actually, one of the funniest things that happened was we literally moved up here, and I had 10 or 12 contracts close, like in the same day. It was like God saying, "See, I told you." It was never them. And
Right.
so, in the sense of what has happened since my dad has passed, I have been in such a, um, for a myriad of reasons, from trainings that I have been in to certification courses that I was guided to take. All of these things have me living in such a state of trust that it does not make sense to my human, if that makes sense. Like my it's just such a different level. So I think that for me, with my dad, I always felt like I had to fill a role. I was going to be taken care of or compensated or acknowledged or supported if I did these certain things and did not do these other things. And a lot of the supply, financially, emotionally, and otherwise, was pulled back or given in direct relationship to my feelings, expressions, communication, and behavior with them. And so, what I'm finding so interesting is that um, that's all changed. Like now, it kind of feels like it doesn't really matter what I'm doing in the sense of I don't have to fill a particular role. I don't have to do business this certain way or that certain way because people are telling me to. I don't have to, it's like that feeling of having the rules set and you have to behave this way and not this way for abundance to come, for, clients to be happy, for it. Like, what if I just leaned into what is right in front of me and trusted that the next thing that shows up is the thing that I'm supposed to pursue? And when I put a retreat out there and it kind of like falls apart and doesn't fill, that's because someone knows that I have this other client who's going to need me on the ground 10 hours a day for 6 weeks, and there's no way that I could have done both. And so, it's living like that where I feel so much less pressure in my life to perform to get what I want.
Yeah, we create this stress. We create these things that we're not understanding correctly, and we all live at the level of understanding that we have. And so, I love the statement about I think it was Oprah, it may have been someone else, but may have been Maya Angelou now that I'm thinking about it, but you do the best you can, and when you know to do better, you do better.
Mhm.
And we are learning and we are growing, and um, we've always had a source that has an abundant supply, more than we could ever exhaust, no matter what aspect of our life it is, whether it's finances, emotional.
Mhm.
I had a serious knot to unravel, in the writing of the book, as you know. I had to unravel an emotional knot, an intellectual knot, and a religious knot in order to clarify my own understanding about the path that I had been on, and the path that I'm on now. And but when we are feeling and thinking that we are disconnected, it's always about understanding, and it's what we are thinking is there, not what is actually there. And so that's really the maturity. Some people would call it, spiritual growth. It's really about maturity, and the maturity being that we understand the larger scale, the larger picture, and that what's going on in the world and all the complaining and all the anger and all the vulnerability, this is just everybody at their level of understanding. And to impact the world, you would think that our understanding then would have to be at a higher level. And by that, I don't mean we're ever better than anybody. We can only be better off. We're not, I'm in no way thinking I'm some kind of a, enlightened supernatural guru. Actually, I think it's much more simple than all of that. And we love to complicate things, and we love to complicate our lives. And we like to think that our problems are so sophisticated that it requires, some type of magnificent moment, of enlightenment to fix it. And it's really just about living in love, recognizing that we come from love, we are love, and that we can let love flow through us. And when we're not doing that, I promise you, we are inviting all kinds of garbage and things we don't want, into our lives. Amanda, this has been great. I really don't feel like we exhausted everything. I wanted the conversation to be organic and natural, but I do feel like we have probably more to talk about. I should put you on the spot and get you to commit to a second show so that we can get into some of the other things that I think are very important. But I do want people to know how to connect with you. Hold up your book if you've got it nearby. Is it available on Amazon?
Mm-hmm.
Upside Down Mommy. It's a great book. I've read it myself. Very, very enlightening. You can connect with Amanda at www.truetointention.com. I'm sure she would love to hear from you. And Amanda, thanks for taking the time, to be with us.
Thank you. And I absolutely will do another show with you anytime. Thank
you. Well, we'll talk about that. This is Rick. Thank you for tuning in to Rick on Life. And remember, no matter what's going on in your life, just sprinkle a little love on it. See you next time.